Good afternoon and welcome to my talk. I hope you've had a good conference, and my contribution is called After COVID, from the classroom to the glassroom and back again. So my minimal pair, as we call them in phonology, classroom and glassroom, captures what I'm going to be talking about: the experience of teaching before COVID in an ordinary classroom, and then the repercussions of the pandemic when most of us had to willy-nilly teach in the classroom or to teach online. And I'll be exploring this experience process of a traditional approach to language teaching to a more modern technological approach, and then returning to reality after at least decided as it has. So that's my title, and my plan today will be in 4 stages. As you can see, it's very simple. We'll flash back to life before COVID, the experience of teaching in an ordinary face-to-face classroom, and then the same classroom, but during COVID and the wearing of masks and so on. And then the necessary stage of switching to online teaching for reasons of safety. And now, today, where we stand after COVID, for whatever reason, the measures seem to have been suspended and teaching has gone back to the classroom with far fewer special measures imposed by governments for very good reasons, no doubt. So that's what we're going to be doing. And whenever you see this question mark, it means I'm asking you to participate, albeit just by thinking of the question I'm posing. So it's a kind of cognitive interaction, as we can't do it as I would like to in an ordinary webinar, or if we had more time. So the first question then, for example, is to look back to life before COVID in the ordinary classroom and to try and remember something which you find characterized teaching in the classroom. Something which perhaps was suspended once the pandemic had started. So for example, in my case, I hope you're thinking about this. What I bring to mind is the face-to-face interaction that we enjoyed, if that's the word, with our students. We could see them, they could see us, they could see our body language, we could see the expressions on their face, they could see our mouth moving, we could moderate our distance, we could stand close to the students, we could stand further away, we could stand at the front of the room, at the back of the room, at the side. We used the open space of the classroom to make our teaching more effective. And let's call this embodied teaching. So it's not just the voice, it's the whole body and it's the whole space. So body language, eye contact, what we call proxemics in linguistics or pragmatics, the use of the space and the use of body language. The importance of this before COVID in the real classroom was that it provided feedback from the students to us, the teacher. It provided feedback to the learners about how we were receiving what they were giving us in terms of language acquisition. And of course, it gave the pupils themselves, the learners, feedback to each other. And all of this, above all, is important for a primary reason, which is the importance of building a rapport or positive relationships in the classroom. So this is what I remember as important, if you like, as definitive of classroom teaching before COVID hit us. But I want to go today to long before COVID to give us a sense of historical perspective. Context is all, and understanding how our profession has developed over the years, so we can see the present moment in perspective and learn to appreciate it a little bit more fully, if you like, in a more multi-dimensional way. So can you guess now who I am? Which of these young men is your speaker today? In a much younger, of course, manifestation. Can you see who I am there? There I am. Am I in the back row or the front row? On the left or the right? So you're thinking, you're doing a bit of cognitive interaction, as I called it, and that's me. Okay, and I'm going back, and I'm going to flash back to when I was a schoolboy, when a lot of us perhaps here, but not everybody, was at school before technology was ever dreamed of as a pedagogic device, at least. So let's imagine then I am this boy. Have a good look at him. It could be me, it could have been many of my fellow pupils, but I was often in this situation in the old-fashioned classroom, and this is often how I felt. And how do you think he feels? Is he involved in the lesson, this young boy? Look at the expression on his face. Does it indicate engagement? On the contrary, he seems to be indifferent, unmotivated, uninterested in what is going on. And this is still a very, very common problem, motivating learners. And I was a very unmotivated learner for most of my student life, most of my school days. I was a very bad learner. And I saw the light at the last minute. And so here I am. But how did we get to this improved situation of a pupil being motivated and loving even the learning experience? Well, let's pose this as a puzzle. There's our sample pupil, Billy, his name is. It could be me, could be Luke. So I'm using Billy for today. And there is Billy at the beginning of the lesson, picture A on the left. And I want you to imagine what happened between this beginning of the lesson and the end of the lesson, where we see the same boy. And if you look closely at his facial expression, I said at the beginning how important body language and facial expression and eye contact and so on were and are in the physical face-to-face classroom. And we can see here the boy's face is very, very different, and he seems engaged and motivated and completely different from the first picture. So I want you to try and imagine what the teacher did, what happened in the classroom between A and B. Are you thinking? Okay. We'll come back to this in a few minutes towards the end of my presentation, but now you're thinking of what could possibly have happened. What was the catalyst that brought about the change? And this, I hope, will give us important lessons in pedagogy, which may be valid both in a traditional classroom and in a classroom which is dominated, if you like, by information technology. So this is to be continued. Patience. So before COVID also, we need to remember now, coming a bit closer to our present time, I remember also that we've heard frequently predictions about the future, and you can see these predictions about technology as promises or threats of virtual learning. By promise, I mean the possibility that the new technology would improve our work in a very significant way. Now, this was part of the optimism of technology, if you like. But some teachers, more traditional teachers like myself, perhaps might have seen this talk of the teacher and technology as more of a threat. And you can see why if you look at the cartoon. Have you ever felt like this? Ask yourself. That faced with a computer and the recent developments in technology, that you were somehow incompetent, that your weaknesses as a teacher were being brought out and feel perhaps sometimes that you can't do anything right. Okay, so a threat or a promise? Well, one chap, technology offered great promise, and a better future was Mark Prensky, one of the prophets of information technology in education, indeed. And he justified his position by saying that young people, as you can see, and this is still true, I think, are natives of a digital world. Now, do you agree also when he says that these natives of a digital world are different from previous generations? They think and learn differently from their forebears, from young learners and adult learners, indeed, before, but particularly those who were born into the technology, and we call them digital natives. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Now, do you agree or disagree with what he says here? He goes further and says that teachers who are not digital natives, I'm an example of a digital immigrant, for example, that we are unable to relate to our students' world and their affinity with information and communication technology. Is this true or false, in your opinion? Does it match your own experience? I hope you're thinking, interacting in your mind. Now, coming even more close to home, here's TESOL International, of which here today, TESOL Greece is a small branch. And they also joined in the debate about the future of education and the role of technology in this future. And I want you to focus here on what TESOL say about the need for teachers to integrate their work with technology, but also on the modal verb should, and whether you agree with the use of this verb should. Think of an alternative modal verb. Should is a modal verb, as you all know, of obligation, some kind of necessity, if you like. What could you replace it with? What other modal verbs could slot in here in this sentence, and what difference would it make? But like Prensky, they are making a very strong statement, if you like, about the future and the necessity for teachers to adapt their work to technology, because that's the way their students are going. That's the way their students think. And there's a lot of research done into this and statements made by people who are in favor of the digital revolution, as it's called. And some of the claims made, with or without the backing of research, are, for example, that the digital revolution helps us to meet students' individual needs much more than in the past. Do you agree or disagree with that? Is that your experience? I don't know what the answer is yet. We're exploring, and it's important, I think, always to explore, to question revolutions, indeed. And in our case, the digital revolution, which was striving to become a pedagogic revolution. So do we agree with this? And individual needs is where we begin, always in the communicative approach onwards. This has been the starting point of our methodology, focusing on the learner's individual needs. And Bish, the previous quotation I gave you was from a chap called Bish. He also goes further and says, multimedia deepens comprehension and strengthens learning. This is a large claim to make. Does it match your experience of the last few years? If not during COVID, before COVID, if you were using technology before COVID as well, you have a lot of experience now. And you can assess what people claimed for technology, drawing on your own practical experience. So true or false, agree or disagree, that multimedia actually improves learning. It deepens and strengthens understanding. And in our case, language acquisition, which is what we want. If that's true, then it's very important for us to know about it. Sure you agree. And overall then, here is a very overarching statement that captures a dream that we would love to be true of our profession, that technology will empower us as teachers and our learners. And this would be a global, universal truth, agree or disagree. Empowering educators and learners. Because power is what it's all about, it seems, in education and in other things. To sum up this position, the inimitable Sugata Mitra, who goes even further, and as I say, this is where the promise becomes a threat or a nightmare, perhaps for some of us. There's a teacher that can be replaced by a machine. There's a modal verb can, and here's another modal verb, should. Again, the teacher should be replaced by a machine if this is possible to do so, using a machine instead. So again, you can think of other modal verbs that could fit into this slot. So I hope you're thinking. I won't ask you to shout out, but I hope it gets you thinking. And Sugata Mitra was a very convincing and tantalizingly persuasive speaker, very entertaining too, and some wonderful experiences to relate about the impact of technology on the poor in India and in places which governments neglect. And he extends his philosophy, as you see here, to education in general and globally as the way to go. A teacherless world, if necessary for him, is an ideal. Do we agree or disagree? There are some who do disagree. And one of my favorite books on this subject is one called The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, a very readable book and beautifully written for me, very persuasive in his way, and he has a different perspective on technology in education. He claims that the evidence suggests, he does stress that it's drawing on evidence, on research, that the technology actually is bad for our cognitive abilities, our thinking capacities, that it diminishes our learning and weakens our understanding. So this is the complete opposite of what we saw just a few minutes ago. The claims made by TESOL and other experts in education. Do we agree or disagree with this statement? Well, we know that the internet was not designed by educators originally. I think it was something to do with the military. But the point that Carr makes in his book is that information in online form, on Google and so on, Wikipedia and all this kind of stuff, all the information we have wonderfully available on the internet is actually bad. It's badly presented because it's a concentration mishmash of data in fragments, a fragmenting mishmash. Do you agree or disagree with this? Rather than deepening our learning, it actually fragments it. And what does he propose in its place? What Carr focuses on in terms of learning processes is his concept of deep reading compared to reading online. And he does quote some research in his book to back up this statement. So do you agree or disagree with this? But you could read the book and see how he argues it. But the ability to know in depth, there's this idea of deep understanding again, you see, it keeps coming up. So knowing a subject in depth is for him a question of our individual abilities to connect with the text. And it's a rich and very personal, idiosyncratic process, drawing on a profound concept of intelligence. And that's deep reading. It's what we do when we read our favorite novel or even a technical book, which we need to understand thoroughly or enjoy thoroughly, as I do when I read George Eliot's Middlemarch, a book of 800 pages, which I've read again and again. And I read it for more and more detail in great depth, as he says. And I hope it has made me a more intelligent person or more aware, let's say, person than before. So that's the claim made. And in a humorous way, we can sum up this argument between the two ways of learning and the two ways of reading, reading online and reading with a book in your hand. And the mother says here to the child, it's called reading. It's how people install new software into their brains. So this captures the debate, if you like. So it has its humorous side, but it makes us think just exactly what are we learning when we learn online, when we read Wikipedia, instead of reading a book about the subject. We could think of lots of examples of how this availability of the mishmash of information positively or negatively affects our real-world experience of knowledge and the pleasure in learning. So we move to COVID now in the classroom. So this was before COVID. Okay, the direct contact, the interaction with our learners, the importance of body language, and then the appearance of technology running side by side with the traditional classroom. And a lot of teachers did either the one or the other. But COVID began to change things. So COVID initially was a question of teaching in the same classroom, but in very extraordinary circumstances. The most obvious circumstance, of course, is that we, the teacher, and our learners had to wear a mask. And what was the significance of this? Well, it's a very unnatural thing to be doing, as you know from your own experience, wearing a mask on both sides of the classroom divide, teacher and students, hiding, as it were, behind the mask. And the challenge that I raised right at the beginning when I showed you those two pictures of the little boy in the classroom is how to motivate a child, how to instill a passion for learning, a love of learning in the child. And the appearance of lockdown and the mask and all its restrictions, it focused and highlighted our responsibility as teachers, parents, governments to maintain and sustain the learner's love of school. This became even more of a challenge and even more imperative. I'm sure you agree. And there's Billy Elliot enjoying every minute of learning. And this is the ideal that we would all like to achieve, where the child is overjoyed and jumping with joy at being with us in the classroom. But that's the dream. What about the reality? Well, to help me draw on the reality, the actual experience, I'll be using one teacher's experience and her recording of her experience of teaching with masks in her journal. This is Vicky, and we work together on her classes in a Greek state school here in Chania. So it's topical and appropriate that we should end with this example of a teacher in action in this particular place, in this particular time. And I asked her, as her collaborator, her mentor, if you like, to keep a journal of what was happening in class. And the first impression Vicky got was that the challenges that we were facing, teachers were facing, were challenges that they had not been prepared for. They had not been trained for. The training gap, let's call it. The demands of the COVID era with masks were abnormal. The pandemic imposed an abnormal social behavior. People don't go around wearing masks normally unless they are abnormal, bank robbers or terrorists or whatever. So our normal behavior was restricted and circumscribed, says Vicky in her journal. So these are the challenges she had to overcome without the appropriate training. So what does it mean to be masked in front of students pedagogically, in terms of interaction, the things I focused on right at the beginning, and motivation? Well, Vicky's first impression was that there was a sadness in the air. In the classroom, they weren't actually very naughty or boisterous. Strangely enough, these normally very active and overactive learners were sad and afraid and timid behind their mostly black masks in the early days of the first lockdown. That was the picture that Vicky got when she went into her classroom. This strange silence, subdued students. They seemed sad and afraid. So what does this mean when you're trying to motivate them? What is being masked? What is being hidden behind these black masks as they were? Well, the energy of the students. Young people are by definition active, full of energy, and energy is eternal delight. We have to channel this energy, to tap it, to make the most of it. And two of her students, she told me, got up in the early days of COVID and did some acrobatics in front of the other students. They were fond of going to the gym, and they were missing their gym classes because contact, as you remember, wasn't allowed. And one of them got up and started doing this kind of gymnastics, acrobatics feat in front of the class. And then a female, his partner, in fact, joined him, and they did a joint performance. And the teacher allowed them to do this. Interestingly enough, anything for a quiet life, it was quite a spectacle, and they were applauded by the other students. So this little episode suggests that what is being masked in this situation of teaching during the pandemic is more than just the face, but the energy, the feelings of being young, the freedom of youth, and the sheer pleasure in your own energy, the ability to move your body around, which can be a headache for teachers, but it's also a way for young people to let off steam and also to build self-esteem. Because when you recognize their energy and channel it into learning, then it's a good way of recognizing who they are and building their self-esteem, which is one of the driving forces I've discovered over the years of learning. When people feel good about themselves and you make them feel good. But if this energy is not tapped, is not channeled towards more efficient learning, what happens? Well, the paper airplanes begin to fly very often. We have discipline problems, because what you're muzzling is their sense of fun, freedom. And so Vicky writes in her journal that she went into class once and it was chaos. They'd got over their feeling of sadness and restraint and so on. And they were now confident enough to start throwing paper airplanes and bottle tops and erasers at each other, and what we call discipline problems in our profession. Classroom management, a big issue, which of course was highlighted and made worse, exacerbated by the pandemic, after the students had overcome the initial shock of, being trapped behind the mask. So there she is, there's Vicky writing about her rebellious students, their frustrations, and how they were expressing this very often in serious incidents of bullying each other. So the usual problems of teaching in a large mixed ability classroom in a state school became even more acute because of the mask. And if in motivational terms, you could say, well, being hidden behind a mask in a stuffy classroom is bound to disturb the learners and provoke misbehavior because it's uncomfortable, and physiological needs, as we shall see, are essential to people feeling comfortable in the classroom and outside the classroom. So the stuffy classroom, the stuffy mask, gave the students a license to misbehave. They thought they were right. They were behaving according to the restrictions imposed upon them. And they stopped listening to the teacher, and they paid no attention to her vain attempts to teach them English. So these problems existed before the pandemic and before lockdown, but they were exacerbated, as I said. So a general response, of course, to these problems before and after the COVID crisis is to provide an outlet for energy, as I've said, in a safe, constructive way. And of course, all the other things we effective teachers have learned to do. And research will back up the importance of praising learners, building rapport with them, positive relationships, in other words, building their self-esteem. And how you do these things is a question of each individual teacher, but many teachers will begin with the learner, what I call learner input, what the learner brings to class, whether it's texts or ideas or feelings, experiences, a learner input approach with the focus on the learner, whether online or offline. And what Penny our distinguished colleague, has called using discipline-friendly techniques. It's not our subject today, but this is a broad response to the points that Vicky has made in her journal so far. So how did she go about building rapport? We worked on this together, and we did focus on learner input. An example of what I mean. Well, here are her students, they in Crete, in Chania, and they made up an interesting mosaic of people whose parents have to make a living through farming. And so we had a student who had to help parents pick the olives. Their parents, you know, were farmers, and they had sheep. There was one of her students feeding the lamb there, picture number 3. Another student, like Billy Elliot, wanted to be a dancer. And she also taught hairdressers. So she was teaching special English. It's a vocational school. So their vocation, their future plans were important. And learner input simply meant that she knew about her students. Here they are. I've disguised their names on the left there. And I asked Vicky to collect information about them and sum it up in a chart like this. And there are some of their interests and any other comments. So a chart like this, I'm sure you have something similar, but you know your students and you have to use what you know in order to motivate them to overcome some of the problems we've identified. How do you do this? Well, for example, they write a text like we have here. Here's one of our students writing about what it feels like tasks or being at home, doing online learning. And this is one of the things she asked them to write about. You take what they write, you correct errors if you like. You can even take their Greek texts if their English is so hopeless that they can only write effectively in Greek. You take the Greek text, then you render it into English and then work with it. This is what you do. And this is how we work together with Vicky on her learner input. So this gap-filling exercise is based exclusively on texts that the students wrote. So when they do the exercise, they see themselves in the exercise. Their errors are transformed into opportunities for learning. This is good for their learning, we hope. Begins from where the learners are at, quite literally, and it hopefully boosts their self-esteem. You don't humiliate them with their errors, but you show that their errors are useful. You can do things with them and promote learning. So these are things that students originally wrote, and they've been transformed into a gap-filling exercise. And this is an error correction exercise, which you're probably familiar with yourselves. On the left, we have errors that students have made in their written work, or common spoken errors that Greek students have in our case. And you ask them to correct, but you give them guidance in the final column in this form of the exercise. I've given them, with Vicky's help, a focus on what aspect of language we're focusing on. So again, the starting point is what the learners bring to class. And even testing this Oki bear of learning is the test. It frightens and it motivates at the same time. So what we've got here is a multiple choice based on the student's own sentences, and the distractors are there to help them focus on typical errors that they may make. But the content of the STEM sentence is actually taken from the learner's work. So this is learner input, a learner-based test, let's call it. And things have been written about this. You can read about it in lots of different monographs and articles. So what Vicky was generally doing, and she's very good at this, is gaining students' trust. By doing trust, not talking about it, she shows she respects the learners by taking their work and not throwing it into the bin, as it were, metaphorically or literally, but building trust through using what they bring to class and showing them that she has a constructive attitude to their work and wants to help them progress further. So let's move on to the classroom. At some point, things got so bad with the pandemic, the number of infections and so on was so serious, and physical contact had to be restricted even further than it was already in the classroom. So we had to go to the classroom for safety's sake. So there was no choice, really. Everybody was locked out of school and during the lockdown, and there was no more face-to-face teaching, even behind masks anymore. It was a question of sitting at home and conducting the lesson online. It was imposed, there was no choice, no blended, no flipped, no lockstep teaching, nothing traditional, nothing very modern either, but online teaching for everybody. Techies and people who are not techies, literate or illiterate people, digitally speaking, Luddites, people who wanted to smash computers, they had to teach with computers whether they liked it or not. So this is the situation. And which situation for you rings a bell? Were you in either one of these situations in the last 2 years? So you're thinking now, oh yes, the first situation is familiar to me, but when I was teaching online, or the second, which one is you, or could be both? In the first, you couldn't stop them talking. The young ones online in the classroom couldn't stop talking. You couldn't control them. They're going berserk, going bananas, as it says. The adolescents, on the other hand, it was difficult to squeeze anything out of them. From the safety of home or their beds or wherever they were, they would shut up mostly and not say much. And they would pretend that there was something wrong with their computer, the connection was poor. So what did we discover in online teaching? Well, some of the things Vicky discovered about her own particular classes was that what she had in class with students who were constantly dominating, the show-offs, she calls them, they could no longer show off. It was more difficult online, so that's a positive thing. And if they were very disruptive students, she could mute them or even eject them if they were getting completely out of hand. And as a last resort, the discipline issues online could have been handled as they are in face-to-face teaching also by mentioning the magic word test. You're going to take a test, and they would, focus on getting a good mark. Good marks are a great way of subduing learners. So there are some good things initially. She could control the class, and some of the students who were silent in class online used the chat box to express themselves in a way that they were too embarrassed to do or weren't allowed to do by the dominant students in the classroom. So it gave some students a voice. That's good. We also discovered, though, that there were lots of different ways in which students could not take part in the lesson. Playing truant is the most obvious way, not turning up for class and doing other things, going to the cafeteria or whatever. Well, online, it becomes much easier to switch off, to be there and not be there. And Vicky discovered a variety of ways of misbehaving or playing truant in our case. So we've called these the invisible student, the silent student, the peripatetic student, the supine student, and the hi, I'm up a tree picking olives student. So these are different ways of misbehaving. I hope you're thinking of your students and whether they did any of these forms of misbehavior or not turning up for class online. So the invisible student will connect, and they're there. You can think they're there, like I am here now, but they're actually still in bed, catching up on some sleep. But they've connected, so they're present. They'll get a mark for being present. The silent student has connected, but just says nothing, does nothing, maybe having a cup of coffee. The peripatetic student can be walking in town, as they were very often, going for coffee, and connected on her smartphone with the English lesson. Multitasking, the supine one, lying in bed. And sometimes the camera discovered the students in bed with or without their partners. And of course, as I said, the children, some of them are from farming families. And there was the student who said, "Hello, teacher, I'm picking olives at the moment. I'm actually sitting up a tree, picking the olives." And you've got to motivate the student to be learning English, because they said it's a vocational school. English for picking olives purposes. English for milking the cows purposes. So we have a variety of misbehavior. But how do you connect all these fragments, this mishmash of fragmented students all over the place? You think they're there in the classroom, but very often they're not there. It's an optical illusion. We looked at the bright side and we agreed that some of the students started speaking online when they didn't speak in the classroom. But the other thing the teacher does, of course, is to teach students using topics that they are interested in. And we know now what our students are interested in because we've done our little questionnaire at the beginning, and we have a chart of their hobbies and their interests. So we have to choose topics to talk about which they will find interesting. In our case, there are two kinds of topics. The vocational school has students who are learning English because one day they're going to be mechanics, they're going to be hairdressers, beauticians, plumbers, and so on. So I've given you here a list of their needs and their wants. There's an important distinction in our profession, which emerged with the communicative revolution in the mid-70s, between needs and wants. Students very often want things, and we try to give them what they want in order to motivate them, but they may not be the best thing for their learning, English in our case. But if you want to engage them and have them on your side, as it were, you do give them some of their wants, but you need to give them things they need to learn English. And even further, to get a good education, because English is just one part of their education. And at the end of the day, they're going to go out into the big wide world and cope with the challenges of living in this very difficult big wide world of ours. So if you look at our list here of needs and wants, you may spot two which don't fit into the general pattern of topics that the teacher drew on to motivate her learners. Can you see two which are different from the others? Well, what we mean is that all the other topics in red here are things that the students both want and perhaps need. They want to because either it's important for their vocation, their future job, or it's because it's something they enjoy, like football or volleyball. They're not going to become professional football players or whatever, but these are things that they want. And they want things to do with the digital world. This is the current generation. And they may need some of these things are both needs and wants. So social media, computers, they may enjoy being online, but they may also need to know about these things for their future, success professionally and socially speaking. So we could try to give them both. So for example, this is an example of providing the students with wants, a topic for learning English, social media, exploring what it means to be, active on social media and learning English at the same time. So this is a want. You may say it's also a need in our modern world, fair enough. But it gives you an idea. This is a want. This is a student's choice. The student brought the text about football in Crete and Brazilian football, and this is what the text was about, the connection between the two through a particular player. So the teacher was trying to meet their wants and learn English, to teach them English through this meeting of the students' wants. We said there were beauticians, many of them, hairdressers and so on. So talking about beauty was definitely what they wanted, and in this case, what they needed as well. So you can do that, but you can also expand their horizons, if you like, educationally speaking, by going beyond these topics, which are strictly defined by what the students are doing at school. And you can introduce something which the Greek government has kind of restricted in Greek schools, which is art, painting, and so on. And the teacher can use her own initiative at times, and where it serves her purpose in meeting the students' wants and needs in this case, introduce them to a topic they're interested in, which is beauty here, and also at the same time be teaching them about great art in a very simple way. Here we have two pictures of Frida Kahlo, a photograph, and what she made of herself in terms of concepts of beauty in the painting, which you see on the right. And here you can focus on the language of beauty and hairdressing, as well as, talking about her art as a creative process. Similarly, we introduced poetry into her lessons. We took a poem which seemed to match the lockdown experience, where we were all isolated in our homes, very often not allowed to go out except under very strict restrictions. The lockdown experience is reflected prophetically in a poem by a great Greek poet from Alexandria, Constantine Cavafis, Walls. And the teacher used this poem to teach English and also to focus on the topic of being cut off, locked out of life, which is what the rather pessimistic Cavafis writes about in this beautiful poem, Tichi, walls. In Greek, it's a pun on walls and fate. And it seemed to be our fate at the time to be trapped at home, unable to communicate with people in an ordinary, sociable way. Fortunately, we seem to be coming out of it now. So back to the classroom. After all this is over. So we've gone from the classroom to the glassroom. We've tried to cope with online teaching, even if we weren't fans of technology. We had no choice, and it was learn to swim or sink. Like it or leave it. You've got to do it, whether you like it or not. Okay, there's no other offer. So that was a powerful and useful experience. But we had come back to the classroom, and Vicky tells me that the glass is still in the class, she says, although they're back in class without masks now very often, and able to move around more to use. But what she means by the glass is still in the class is that they think it's legitimate now to use their smartphones and technology in class because the government legitimized the technology over these last 2 years. So it's difficult to get their attention. They're constantly with their heads bent down, looking at something on their smartphones. And you can imagine it's a very familiar experience. And even when we're out with our friends, we often can't get their attention from looking down at their smartphones. So Vicky has discovered that now she's competing with smartphones more so than ever because the technology has been legitimized by the crisis, and it's very much an integral part of our lives, including our educational lives. So that's the situation. Now, an accumulation of experiences over 2 years, confirming perhaps what my friend Nicholas Carr says in his book, that technology is, and the smartphone, the internet, etc., are deliberately designed to interrupt you, deliberately designed to get your attention, and in fact to divide your attention from what you're doing. Talking to people or doing other things, engaging in social interaction, your attention is often divided. We've all seen this. And the good side of this is multitasking. The bad side is that we can't get people's attention anymore. They're both physically present and physically absent in a way. So I'm going to finish most of what I have to say by looking at what the learners, we've seen what the teacher had to say about the experience of the classroom to the glassroom. Now let's see what the learners said. And I've highlighted some key words for you to save time. These are all things that Vicky's students have said, that what they felt about teaching online, being at home. In the end, looking back, they missed their friends, their teachers, and even they missed annoying people. They like some aspects of online learning, that they could stay in bed longer. And again, these keywords, friends, comes up again and again in these quotations from learners. School is still boring, but they miss their friends. They miss other people. There is a chance for me to learn something here in class that she feels she couldn't learn online, which is interesting. Another one which agrees is that they learn more in class than online. I like seeing my friends in the flesh and not through a glass. Thank you. She's helped us sum up what we've been trying to say. That the importance of face-to-face physical interaction and the disadvantage of the glass. Hates wearing the mask, but the lesson is more enjoyable when we can see each other. Online learning is very often interrupted by a poor connection, and this, I don't know if this is ever going to go away, and the technology doesn't work properly. This is always going to happen. We can learn to live with this, but it's one disadvantage. And as we've seen, online lessons often fail because kids just do other things. Perhaps the question is, well, you've got to motivate them to not do other things. And that is the big question, motivation. We're going to have to finish with talking about what motivation means. People, the beautiful feeling of learning and communicating on normal terms. I hope that the day we go back to online lessons is far away, because I want to be in touch with people. So it seems we can't do without other people. There's a profound truth here, perhaps, goes way beyond the classroom and into the classroom and into our lives, our need for people. And the students can be incredibly eloquent. Obviously, their errors have been corrected here. Some of them have been translated from Greek. This one learned more online because she wasn't distracted by her friends. So the friends are a menace as well, messing around all the time. So it's often better to be at home and learning technologically, and I'm sure Sugata Mitra would agree with this. But, you know, it's sad that you can't embrace, kiss, or play, of course. The classroom can be frightening, worrying, the fear of being infected, the COVID variants, and the reliability of governments to protect children and teachers from infection. Very often politics intervenes and the wrong decisions are made. Not for reasons of education or health, but because it's convenient, pragmatic, realpolitik. So what have we learned? Let's sum up from our 2 years of pandemic pedagogy. Well, we've learned that the human factor is important in both situations, online and offline. And I'll go back to the great Maslow from the 50s, but still highly relevant, one of my favorite models of motivation, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we can connect his traditional hierarchy of needs with some of the things we've said. That's what I'm going to do now. So can you remember some of his needs, what the basic need is, right at the bottom of his chart? We mentioned the stuffy classroom, the mask, and having to sit down all the time, not being able to move. And this caused problems because moving and breathing are natural human needs, or physiological needs, as Maslow calls them. And you have to fulfill this basic, fundamental biological need before you can do other things says Maslow. But we also said that the students felt fear, the fear of infecting others and being infected. So their feeling of safety has been undermined by this experience, in the classroom at least. At home, they feel safer. And that's one good reason for adopting online learning, the fears of infection. The distance, the restrictions on movement, the bad behavior that resulted. We can say, well, this is a loss of the feeling of love and belonging when you're constantly being told to do this and do that, and behave yourselves, and you're not allowed to talk too loud, to take your mask off, to get up and walk around, to touch other students. This what Maslow calls the feeling of love and belonging. The fragmentation of the classroom, it undermines this feeling of being loved and belonging to a group which is coherent and cohesive. Don't talk, don't touch. What happens to your self-esteem when you're constantly forbidden to do natural things like talking, breathing, touching, moving, interacting? And at the end, if you remember what Maslow puts right at the top of his hierarchy of needs, the pyramid of needs is self-actualization or self-fulfillment through education to enable you to face the challenges of real life with as much support as possible from your learning experiences at school. So this is our ultimate aim as educators, to give students a feeling of fulfilling their dreams, their self-actualization, as he calls it. So this is what we've learned. Confirms Vygotsky's view about the social origin and Piaget's view of the social origin of children's speech, the importance of social interaction. Interpersonal connections are so important, we've realized, in learning and in being physically, psychologically, emotionally healthy. The collaborative nature of language, this is what we've learned. In communicative approaches, of course, but also through Vygotsky and other great educators. And the importance of emotion in motivation, the need to emotivate, as I call it. So this can be electronic motivation online, but it can also focus on the importance of not forgetting emotion, feelings, personality when you're trying to motivate and engage your learners. So emotivation can mean two things, can't it? The teacher leads the students and follows them. Both are important. We don't pander to the learners just because they're digital natives, but neither do we ignore the fact that they're digital natives. We synthesize the leading and the following to meet students' needs and wants, as I've said, and we discovered with Vicky together. So my conclusion will be in the form of a quote, first of all, from the same guy, Mark Prensky, who was so passionate about the future of digital learning. And he also reminds us, though, that it's time to reassess what good and effective teaching means in a digital age. And I'll take Prensky at his word. And he says what we have to do is to combine the past with the future, the best of the past with the tools of the future, the traditional classroom with the modern glassroom. So this is what we're going to do. So I'm summing up what we've done in an idea which is not mine, but I've given it my own slant of blended learning. And it seems to me that, as Prensky says, this is the way to go. And these are the reasons why the classroom is important. I've mentioned all of them, mostly, I think, in my presentation today, drawing on Vicky's work, and the importance of the classroom as well, of online learning and the working together of the past and the future, which is no longer the future, it's the present now, thanks to COVID. So you see all the things we've talked about, from body language to personal feedback. The ZPD is Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, the way students learn from each other, from people who know more, and the scaffolding business and so on. So Vygotsky is alive and well for me. So the human social nature of language, it's all in the first section there, the first part of the Venn diagram and whatever it's called. And it's all conventional communicative technology in many ways, communicative methodology, sorry. And humanistic learning, the importance of the human factor. So it's humanistic and communicative together in the first. And we don't give all this up, what we've learned from Mario Rimbalucri and all the rest of them, and all the revolutionaries of the communicative approach, and CLIL, and the rest of it, we're not going to throw out of the window. But on the other hand, the glassroom, online teaching, gives us all kinds of flexibility. And there it is, in green on the right-hand side, the glassroom, as I call it, the control over the speed of learning, the pace, the way people learn, is much more easily done online through technology. Self-access, independence, autonomy, saving time and money. These are important. And as Sugata Mitra is implying, bad teacher free. What this means is that technology is often better than the teacher, because the teacher can be negative, can lower a student's self-esteem. She can be ironic or sarcastic, but the computer doesn't insult you in the same way. So bad teacher free, that's what that means. And wonderful ways of correcting yourself online and correcting students' errors as well. You can prepare the lesson, of course, online and present it in class. This is blended learning and so on. So you know all of this. So I'm summing it up for you, the sharing that is possible in classroom technology. So good and effective teaching. That's what Prensky says we should not forget. And I'll go back to what we said. The pandemic and technology have both given us the challenge of maintaining our children's love of school. This is the overarching challenge we faced in the past, we face now, and we shall face in the future. And we'll use whatever it takes to achieve this objective. And again, what the students have said, I'll sum up more or less. I keep saying I'm summing up. Well, here's another way of summing up what is good and effective learning, Mr. Prensky. This is what students have said, that the best teachers were friendly, knowledgeable and talkative, humorous, open-minded and supportive, calm, passionate and sympathetic. That's how we get this boy to smile and to be engaged in our learning. The teacher knows her stuff. She makes us work hard. She makes us laugh, helps us with exams, and is always prepared. Kind, helpful, use their mistakes. These are all things students have said. We should listen to what the students are saying in this case. Great way of explaining, talking about other subject, doing what she preaches, walking the talk. And above all, my favorite quotation from learners of all time is this one. She believed in me and made me believe in myself. And already, as we go back to the puzzle I gave you at the beginning, you can guess what the answer is going to be. How do we go from A to B? How did the teacher in this wonderful episode in a film by Ken Loach called Kes go about transforming the learner from being demotivated to motivated and loving learning? What did the teacher do? What does the great Ken Loach, one of Britain's greatest directors, in this wonderful film, which I recommend? We don't have time to watch any clips from it now, but I can sum up for you, talking about the past, as Prensky says, and the best of the past is a teacher who discovers how to motivate learners. He's talking in this lesson about the past, talking about fact and fiction, telling stories, what you did at the weekend, something that happened to you. And this boy is completely uninspired, like I was at school. I was a very naughty boy at school before I saw the light. How did I see the light? What did teachers do? What does this teacher do? The boy says, I don't know any stories. I know nothing. I'm ignorant. You make me feel ignorant. There's his motivation for you. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, what the teacher did was find Billy's passion. And some of you will know this film, and his passion is taming hawks and training them and he has a hawk or a kestrel called Kess. That's the title of the film. And this is Billy's passion. And the teacher simply gets the boy to get up, gives him the chalk, gives him the power. He touches him. He goes up close to him. He encourages him and says, write on the board the words that we don't understand about taming hawks. He's the specialist now. The pupil is the learner and the teacher in this case. And he's writing up difficult words taken from the terminology of taming hawks. And you see the teacher is smiling now. He's actually touched him on the back to encourage him, given him the chalk, says, go to the front and start explaining. Use your hands, use your body language to explain to us what these words mean. How do you go about taming a hawk? How do you go about controlling their behavior? Which is a bit like controlling learners. So the importance of body language. The teacher is still quite close, but he moves away and he lets the student carry on explaining the words, explaining the concepts, and he's getting more and more engaged. Students are listening. Teacher's gone to the back of the room. He's using the space. He's joined the other students. He's become the audience, the auditor, the learner. The roles have been reversed. So where is the teacher? The teacher is at the back, listening to the learner, learning from the learner. And the other students join in, as Vygotsky and Piaget would say. It's a social experience, the collaboration of learning together, engaging in dialogue. They ask each other questions. They're interested in finding out more about this topic. They've forgotten that it's a classroom now. They want to know about the real world, about the hawk. How do you do it? What do they eat? What do they drink? How's it done? And there's the boy. He's in total control here, motivated, telling his story. And there's the light falling on his face, his happiness, his calm confidence, his self-esteem boosted forever. And the problem I posed at the beginning, we can now solve together. How did the teacher do it? How did my teachers do it? How did I become the worst student in the school, the most misbehaved, to sitting here talking to you today? You can finish this for me. The teacher believed in me and made me believe in myself. That's how the teacher did it in my case and in the case of Billy in the film Kess. And that we could call the Kess effect. I recommend the film, easily available, a masterpiece. So thank you all very much for being with me, and let me thank Vicky for giving me all the raw material, for allowing me to be her mentor, her observer, her trainer, and for teaching me so much, not only about learning and her approach to teaching, but about life itself. So thank you very much to Vicky for making this presentation today possible in more senses than one. Thank you.